are my bangs doing? I had a whole hairstyle planned for this video, and I put my bangs in rollers last night, all for it to look like this. Should I put my hair down? It's giving Mrs. Wheeler. Mrs. Wheeler. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm B. If you're new here, I am a digital illustrator. I draw with a dreamy storybook vibe. And today's video, I'm going to be talking about the process from my latest illustration and specifically how I draw glowy lighting in Procreate. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe so you can watch this small channel grow. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Oh, I was holding in a sneeze that whole time. So this illustration's theme is of a girl who is a lighthouse in a sense. Like, her role is watching over the sea. She is the lighthouse. And I wanted the vibe to be kind of dark and stormy, and like her lights are needed to guide the ships home on a particularly rough night. So that is why the color palette are these dark blues and teals. And for the character herself, I wanted her to be kind of transparent with the background. That's something that I do a lot these days with my characters, is kind of make them look almost bubbly and transparent. So that's why I chose the same kind of blues for her own color palette, and I'm just shading in the middle just a little bit with what the other colors that I'm using for the ocean and the rocks and things like that, but I'm not going very hard on the color palette for her. I just want to keep her very light and airy feeling, and if I render her too much too early on, then it will definitely make her look too opaque, if that makes sense. So I'm just keeping her color palette very simple. One thing that I do when I'm drawing a lot of glowiness in my illustrations is I kind of go straight to the ending, straight to the glowiness, to give myself an idea of what it's going to look like. Sometimes I take it away throughout my rendering process, and sometimes I leave it in, depending. But I know that a lot of artists do all of the glow at the end, at the very end, and I do go back in with some detail at the end, and specifically on the add setting, I will really make that glow pop in the very ending stages. But I think it's really important for me to add the base of my glow and my lighting right away. That way I'm not guessing. With my rendering process, I know exactly the direction I'm heading in. So here I'm just popping in all of my lighting colors that I need to, again, just like give me that idea. I'm also doing the same thing to her clothes, like the outline of her. I'm giving her a white and bright outline to establish those highlights again early on. Something I wanted to do with her character was to give her opaque white hair. So I'm just filling in her hair right now, and then at the end I'm going to give her some detail, but for now I just wanted to establish that base color. And again, I'm not getting very deep with the details that I'm doing, but I am establishing all of the highlights that I need for her glowy effect, to make it very clear of what her role is, that she is the lighthouse, that she's providing all of the light for this dark, stormy ocean. With the waves itself, I went back in and added some more line art because at first it was just kind of scribbly and I didn't really know how I was going to draw in the waves, so I actually looked up some tutorials on Pinterest, some of those quick drawing tips on how to draw waves. I do this a lot actually during my rendering process. If I forgot how to draw something, I'll just quickly look up how to on Pinterest and go off of that. What's really important when you're working with a lot of glow, especially when the majority of the color palette is dark, is to establish those highlights. So shadows are not a problem in this illustration because, again, most of my color palette is dark. So I just really want to make the contrast clear between the light and the dark. And I want most of the highlights to be towards the character who's, again, putting out that light. With the waves, water is obviously very reflective. I'm going to put a lot of highlights in the foam of the waves to cause the illusion of the waves crashing against the rocks and having a lot of motion. But I really want to concentrate those highlights towards the tip of the waves and not put too much highlights in the middle, so that, again, that motion is very clear. It also makes things simple for me because I'm not just blindly putting highlights everywhere trying to figure out what looks good. I kind of just know the top of the waves where there's a lot of foam and where there's a lot of movement, there's going to be a lot of light. And then the bottom of the waves and in the middle, there's going to be a little bit of light, but not too much. I'm also adding in this contrast of this really beautiful, bright turquoise color, and then that turquoise color is also going to be a highlight for my main character later on as well, to give the effect that her dress and skin lighting is bouncing off of the waves. They're like reflecting onto each other. I wanted to make that very clear. This is a very good color palette if you want to practice a setting with a lot of glow. It really lends itself towards it. All of the light colors that I'm using is going to be very obvious against the darker background, so it adds contrast very easily, and I felt like I didn't really have to guess a lot at what this illustration needs. It kind of just lended it towards itself, if that makes sense. Another thing I really like to do when I am drawing in a kind of monochrome color palette and I want some glow in the piece is to add the contrasting color. So in this case, not contrasting color, the complementary color, or no, opposite. I think it's the opposite color, which is orange. And that works really well for these little tiny details of the lighthouse. What is that called? Like the little shed that comes with some of the lighthouses? Is that the house that the keepers? I actually don't know what those little houses are for. I should have looked that up before making it, but whatever, that's okay. But yeah, those little tiny lights that are kind of barely visible unless you're paying attention to them, I found it helpful to give them that complementary color or that opposite color of that orange to kind of draw more attention to it and make it more clear. That light is very visible even though it's very small. And so later on, I think at the very end, I add some of that orange to my character as well to kind of tie in that opposite color. I really love adding yellows and oranges when I'm working with teals and blues. Even if it's just like a little bit, it really stands out and really draws your eye towards that opposite color. Another thing I do, kind of like it's not a cheat, but it's kind of like I don't know, like a shortcut. When I want to add a lot of movement towards a part of my drawing, like hair, clothes, fabric, the waves too, I add these little H shapes with a pin in the add setting to add this really pretty glowy effect. But yeah, I just kind of copy this little H shape all over in different sizes and widths and lengths, kind of stretching it out and squishing it in different places, but it's really just the same shape over and over again. And then I turn down the opacity on the add setting until it adds this really pretty natural glow. And I feel like it just adds a lot of movement and texture without complicating things too much, and it's really easy to do. So that's something that I would recommend trying out if you want more movement without too much going on. So as you can see, I did that to the waves too. A lot of those little H shapes to kind of give the illusion that the water is pulling apart, breaking apart, moving together, just, yeah, again, that movement. Another thing I do to all of my characters that are transparent with the background is I give a white or a really light highlight in line art. And sometimes I do this everywhere, sometimes I only do it to a part of the character depending on just what looks good with the piece. And this just gives the effect that she's a bubble, like that she's not really a physical person, but just kind of like the, I don't know, the watcher of the ocean, the lighthouse in spirit, I don't know. And then I decided to give her dress these pretty bubbly, wiggly texture. I don't know. I don't know what these are. Just these other shapes. Kind of, yeah, I don't know, like blob shapes. And then I turned the opacity down on them as well, kind of blending them in with the existing textures in the dress. And I think that looks really good because it further looks like she's totally reflecting off of the ocean, and I just love that look. This process took me, I think, 6 or 7 hours to complete. It was actually easier than I thought it would be. I thought that this was going to take me longer than most, but again, I kind of just keep repeating myself because it's pretty clear, but the colors just made it really easy. Everything worked with itself. It kind of gave me the answers for me, if that made sense, with using dark blues, and then everywhere I wanted to stand out, just add oranges, peachy tones, whites, and that light turquoise. The contrast was so easy to establish, and I think this is one of my most contrasted pieces yet. Sometimes I would struggle with contrast in my illustrations. I would struggle to have variation in my colors. I would use mid-tones and just not enough lights and darks, so this illustration was fantastic because it's obviously very contrasted with itself. So once again, I highly recommend, if you are practicing glowy lighting for your illustrations, to start with a very dark color palette to establish your contrasted colors. So let's say you're working with a different color palette, maybe like a pink and red color palette to make the background very dark burgundy, and then maybe the main parts of the character this like hot pink, and then to add contrast I would do the opposite color to pink, which is like, depending on the shade of pink, the opposite of red is green, so it would be like teal or blue depending on the shades, but those contrasting colors will really make the pinks stand out and really draw the eyes towards what you want it to. So I would say to focus on complementary colors and opposite colors, and making the majority of your piece those darker colors, and then when you put in those bright light colors, it's just going to stand out and lend itself towards the piece. This was a super fun illustration to do. I had this idea kind of last minute. I wasn't really planning on drawing this kind of character, but it like came to me within a bunch of other ideas that I was playing around with, and I decided to go with this one because it just stood out to me the most, and I'm very glad I did. I think it's super cute. It turned out really well. I also wanted to add this star to her lighting to give just more visual interest, and I love stars. I think that stars and sparkles are a main part of my drawing style, so of course I wanted to incorporate it into this piece as well and kind of make it a focal point, and I think that's really pretty. I hope that you guys enjoyed this drawing process. I really enjoyed drawing it. Again, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe so you can watch this small channel grow. Thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you in the next video.